Hello everyone, welcome to video 2 in this multi-video series on causal finitism. In the first video in the series, we discussed basically why causal finitism provides a parsimonious solution to various paradoxes, and left off just starting to talk about the patchwork principle. In this video, we're going to delve deeper into what the patchwork principle is and what it entails so we can better apply it to our understanding of causal finitism and the debates surrounding the Coulomb cosmological argument. Before jumping into new material, however, I want to make 2 points. First, I'm going to be playing about the last minute or two of the previous video, just basically where we introduced the patchwork principle, so we have all of the introductory context necessary. And secondly, the conversation I had about causal finitism with Logos took the course of 4 or 5 hours. And we jumped around a fair bit. We saved a lot of the technical discussion toward the end. And because some of the examples that we discussed in the technical discussion on the patchwork principle rely upon examples that happened in the middle of the conversation, I'll be breaking up this discussion of the patchwork principle into 2 different videos. This will be a short introduction, and then we'll revisit the patchwork principle later on regarding more technical considerations. So with that said, let's jump right into this.
We just don't know how possible worlds work. And so we could be getting a lot of stuff wrong. And this is actually a good place to segue into another big disagreement in the argument that follows from the first one. That's about what's called modal skepticism. The idea of can we accurately predict or describe ways that possible worlds must be like from our armchair in this one, right? People who are causal finitists might tend toward, yeah, there are certain basic principles that I think possible worlds have to adhere to, and from those principles you can get causal finitist, guideposts in our conceiving of these worlds. Whereas people like Malpass especially just don't like that. They're like, no, the point of possible worlds is like maximal flexibility in our thought exercises. Like, why should we have to constrain these things? Causal finitists, would have a problem with all the Grim Reapers, the Grim Reaper paradox in Hilbert's Hotel or something, and Malpass is just like, well, look, I don't see a problem with the Reapers in the hotel until they try to go kill somebody in this really ad hoc manner. Maybe the problem's with the ad hoc manner they're trying to kill Fred and not the Reapers in the hotel. Because if you just remove that and you just think about an infinite number of Reapers living in a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, your brain doesn't explode or anything. It's fine. So why are we limiting the infinite part of the world when maybe it's the way they go after Fred that's the problem, right? And this gets to a big technical aspect of the debate called oh shoot, it's called the permutation principle, the construction principle. Man, it's been almost like half a year since I've done this stuff.
Yeah,
Oh, the patchwork principle. Patchwork principle. I got it from memory. Okay, the patchwork principle. And basically the idea with the patchwork principle is, let's suppose we imagine a possible world in which there's a ball. And let's suppose we imagine a possible world where if there's one ball, it must be a green ball. Well, there's no contradiction in imagining a possible world that just has one ball in it. And there's no contradiction in imagining a possible world where, like, if there's one ball, it just has to be green for whatever accidental reason of the world, right? And so we can combine the worlds. So maybe there's another third possible world then where there is exactly one ball and it has to be green. And so the patchwork principle there is one guidepost that causal finitists use. They're saying, well, actually, like, in order to have like flexibility in how we take possible worlds and make new ones, we cannot if trying to use the patchwork principle would give us a contradictory world at the end of it, something must be wrong with the ingredients in which we make the world. And intuitively that seems fair, but there is in my opinion, this is where I'm going to get spicy here, there's a technical fallacy in the way they use it for the Grim Reaper.
Okay, so the conversation got a little bit technical, and as I mentioned in the introduction, I want to just have this video be an introductory video to the patchwork principle. So look for a future video where we get into the technical aspects that Logos and I discussed. Can you provide a definition of the patchwork principle, just so we have like a working definition?
Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen the exact written definition, but it's something like this. If there's a possible world in which A, or there's no contradiction in assuming a world in which A, and there's no contradiction in assuming a world in which B, um, then we can patch the worlds together to get a world in which there's no contradiction assuming A and B together.
So,
That's kind of like the naive definition, and there has to be guardrails even on that one, because here's a trivial example, right? Let's suppose I have a possible world where there's a cabin, and and possibly the cabin's doors will open at 11:30. Now let's suppose another possible world with the same cabin and the same door, but the door's closed at 11:30. Well, there's no contradiction assuming either world, but if you try to put them together, you get a cabin with a door that's both open and closed at 11:30. So there has to be guardrails they put on the definition to deal with absurd things like that, but I haven't really seen it, but they have to like implicitly assume it. I just don't know how they cash it out.
okay, yeah. Is there a reason to think that uh, like things in other possible worlds are like identical, or we can do this sort of patchworking thing? Because it seems like I could say, well, we're actually referring to two different cabins because we have cabin one in world one and cabin two in world two, and part of their identity is the world that they inhabit.
Yeah, it's kind of like it, it's this is where it gets really, really complicated because there's so many different views on like possible worlds. Like David Lewis's view is different from Saul Kripke's view is different from like there's all sorts. So the answer is probably yes. Um, I think um the intuition here is something like uh okay, it's like the Reddit memes, right? You ever seen the the Reddit memes about like Hitler where it shows like like the world if okay, so there's like the meme where like if Tesla didn't have his ideas stolen or whatever, the world's
Yeah,
like a glorious like utopia,
yeah,
right?
of course, yeah.
And there's like a play on the meme where it's just like, if Hitler didn't get bullied out of art school or whatever, it shows like the same picture. Um, like the intuition there is it's like the same Adolf Hitler, the same art school, but people like weren't dicks to him or something. Like how
Right.
much different might the world have been? And so it's interesting to think about like how our past could have been different because we're thinking about like the same objects in our past. And I think that's the kind of intuition that we're trying to preserve, at least in that kind of we call these like local worlds. So that's another good clarification to make is we're not just talking about like any old possible world. We're talking about local worlds. So imagine a world in which you're 2 inches taller than you are now, right? So you're just like you in all of the respects. Your history's the same, but like you're just 2 inches taller. What would your world be like? Well, if we're talking about a you that's in no way related to the same you whatsoever, it's almost like impossible to describe like how different your life would be because it's a completely different you. But if it's like the same you but you're taller, well now there should be enough there to say, well, my life is like this now, but it would be different in this way and kind of like have this interesting like thought exercise. And so I think that's the intuition behind like locality is like the definition for like worlds where we assume some things about them are fixed even if other things are different.
It seems to be the case, and I guess the solution is, well, if you had an infinite amount of worlds, you can just imagine anything is the case, right? But a world in which I'm 2 inches taller, like, is a very different experience, and that's going to result in a whole bunch of different things, right? But
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
but by the same token, I guess we could imagine a world in which, like it would be a further off possible world in which I'm 2 inches taller, but for whatever reason, I have the experiences of current me.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep. Okay, that's
And that would be a good use of the Patchwork Principle, right? So it's not a logical contradiction that you have the history that you have because, well, you've had it. And there's no logical contradiction in thinking like, you could have been 2 inches taller than you were. And so like put them together. Like there's this third world where you're 2 inches taller and you have this history like yours. What changes kind of thing.
so. Then I guess the question is, what sort of heavy lifting is the patchwork principle doing here? If we can arrive at these possible worlds without it, is it just a way of like is taking to like expanding our view of possible worlds insofar as like you might not initially imagine a possible world in which you're 2 inches taller and yet you have the experience of being 2 inches shorter.
I think it's just trying to codify something that we already do. So like when you say, imagine there's a further off possible world where like my life is like it was, but I was. 2 inches tall. It's something you intuitively know how to do. And oftentimes philosophers will say, well, we seem to have these patterns of thought. So like Hroth has this idea, and Logos can seem to do it with this other example, and these are the people can do it. Um, and so let's just like codify this principle, this fundamental intuition we have about like the ways we can stretch our imagination. We're just going to call that the Patchwork Principle. And why it gets spooky and scary is because there's a question of what kinds of guide rails should be on the principle. And if the Patchwork Principle is giving us problematic worlds, the immediate question is, well, are one or both of the worlds to blame that gave us the problem, and the principle is just pristine and fine as it should be, or is there some kind of a handrail or guardrail that should be on the principle itself to say, well, we're gonna like put some caveats here to to broaden the number of worlds we can work with, um, but yet still make sure we're going to use it in a way that you don't get contradictory results. And that's where a lot of the debate is had. So like Malpass would say, I want to talk about as many worlds as possible and put as many worlds together as possible, but I'm just going to put guardrails on the principle. Um, and this is actually what the unsatisfiable pair does, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Uh, so the unsatisfiable pair will kind of like put a limiter on the principle to say, if you see a world that does this, it just means you can't put these two worlds together in this way. You might be able to put world A together with some other world. You might be able to put world B together with some other world or worlds. You just can't put A and B together, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I want to maximize the worlds I can combine with other worlds, with the knowledge that unsatisfiable pairs is some worlds you just can't put together. Whereas somebody like Proust or Kuhns would say, well, we don't want ad hoc ways in which we just can or can't combine worlds. We want all or nothing. And so maybe some possible worlds just don't exist to be combined with other worlds because we want the principle to be maximized rather than the worlds. And that seems to be like where the discussion gets heated on that front.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. I realize that it's a shorter video, but the further discussion about the patchwork principle gets rather technical, and it also relies upon examples that we haven't talked about yet in this video series. So I'm going to go through those examples so we can, talk about like what the Grim Reaper paradox is, and then once we have established that foundation, we can get on to the more technical issues. So I'll have a patchwork principle uh, like second episode later on in this series. So look out for that there.